All right, today we are going to learn how to shade an eye. So you've already learned how to draw it, and realistically, the main thing you need to know about drawing an eyeball or anything in particular is draw what you see. So everyone has a different eye shape. Some people have wider eyes, some people have skinnier eyes. It really depends on that person and who you are drawing. When we are drawing our eye from a portrait, we generally have things mapped out on where they are supposed to go. So you might have like a line on this side and a line on this side, right? To show us where that eye is going. And then you have a line that goes in the middle, or the middle of our headline. And so from here, you are going to draw your eyeball. I'm gonna just erase that real quick because our eye this line goes through our eye, right? So the more lines I have, even though it was sketchy, it's gonna be a little bit hard to do. When you draw your eye, I guess when I draw my eye, I always start with the tear duct. So the tear duct is where on the inside part of your eye closest to your nose. And your right eye has a tear duct closest to your nose, your left eye has a tear duct closest to your nose. So I always like to start with the tear duct. Again, some people's tear ducts are like skinny, some people are longer and wider. It just sort of depends. And many people can just do like a C curve, right? And then I start with the top. Again, sometimes people's eyelids are really nice and curved. Sometimes they sort of have a little bit of a slope like this, and then come up, and then they go like down and sort of curve like that. And then depending on their bottom eyelid, maybe it's really skinny, maybe it's flat, maybe it is curvy as well. Sometimes they sort of come up like this, like they have that little slope that way, like a little hill, and then they come and they're like that. All right, so I just made up an eyeball shape. You can make up whatever eyeball shape you want as well. Then let's do our tear duct. So this actually might be a big tear duct. I'm gonna make it a little bit skinnier. It looks a little too big. So I'm just gonna make it a little bit skinnier. And sorry, I actually should have made it a little bit skinnier here and brought it down. There we go. That looks a little bit better for me. And like I said, it might take you a little bit to get your eye shape right. I like that this tear duct is a little bit more below my eye line instead of on top of it. So maybe that's what yours looks like too. It just sort of depends. And then when you create your tear duct, it's pretty easy. You just sort of do a line that comes here and you see a little bit more of the bottom of the tear duct than the top of the tear duct. Then we want to do our iris, which is our colored part of our eye. Your iris takes up a really big chunk of your eye, and then you've got a little bit of white and a little bit of white here. And when we look at our iris, it really depends on where you're looking, but a lot of the times when we are drawing, we're just going to pretend we're looking straight. So you see almost all of your iris. You don't see the bottom or the top. There's no white surrounding your iris part. So you're going to start here and do like a circle, or maybe a little bit in more. And I'm sort of working large scale here. Maybe you guys aren't working as large, and that's okay. And so we do part of the circle on that side, and I come in on this side and do the other part of the circle. And you can see on the bottom here, you only would have to complete this circle, whereas this circle would complete a little bit more. We have a little bit more cut off on the top than on the bottom. And then your, excuse me, your pupil is in the middle of this, and we can't have it in the middle, like we can't have it perfectly centered with our eye line because our iris isn't centered, right? So if I made my pupil centered down here, it would look really off. So we need to make sure our pupil is centered in our eye, and I am not. So I am not asking you to make perfect circles. I draw very sketchy, so that's how I make my circles. Your circle may be not as perfect, and that's okay, and mine is definitely not perfect, but it's not a big deal. From here, you're going to add highlights. So a lot of times we do have multiple highlights. We have to be very careful about adding multiple highlights because we don't want to look like we're a cartoon character. Our main goal of this is to make it look really realistic. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight like here, a little bit going into the the pupil here. So it's in the iris and the pupil. And then I'm gonna draw like a little bit of a highlight here as well. Sometimes we'll have two, sometimes we'll have other ones. So we've got our highlight there. Now we're gonna go on to our eyelid. So our eyelid, again, depends on your eye shape. So some of us, you can see a lot of our eyelids, some of them you can't see. There's just a really thin, some of them like you see only a little bit here, then it goes away and then it comes back out. It really depends on the shape of your eye. One big thing to remember is that it does not connect to the corners of the eye. It's like a floating line on top, however it may be. So I'm gonna put a little bit more eyelid on this guy here, or gal, whoever it may be. Like that. So I'm gonna add that eyelid here. Okay, now we are ready to shade. Oh, actually, time out. Totally forgot the eyebrow. So we gotta do the eyebrow. So we're gonna go up, and our eyebrow starts in the, like from our eye, inside of our eye, up, and then it comes out, like if we were to go to the corner, and from this line, it comes out like 45 degrees. So I'm just gonna draw a little line there. We have to make sure that our eyelid is positioned correctly, or else we're gonna look angry and sad, or we'll look really surprised. So I'm gonna draw, because we have such a huge scale here, I'm gonna draw a line of what I want my eyebrow to look like to make sure I can follow where it's gonna go. Most of the time it'll be a little bit straighter here, like I should probably make mine a little straighter here, and then it curves. When it hits past your pupil, that's generally when it curves. Now, not all the time. Some people are a little bit different. Some people have straighter eyebrows all the way across. It really depends. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna have that line on there, and I'm gonna start to add my eyebrow hairs in, and then we'll move on to shading more of the eyeball here. So when we do our eyebrow hairs, they typically go straight up in the middle, a little bit, I guess a little bit towards that way too, a little bit of an angle, and they do go straight up for a while. And I know that sounds crazy, and you're probably thinking, Mrs. McKnight is nuts, but it does. So they start to come up, and then they start to sort of, when it gets to your iris here, then they'll start to lay down. So they'll start to lay down. Make sure you look like your eyebrow is thick enough, all right? You didn't draw your eyebrow on with makeup. So we're gonna keep this a little thick. Sometimes I tend to get a little thin, and then it doesn't look as good. And I got a stray hair there, and you know what? Sometimes it's easier just to change your paper. Change the direction of your paper. Typically, as you get to the outside of your eyebrow, it does get a little bit thinner, especially us ladies, because we shape our eyebrows. So I'm just making it a little bit thicker. I like it a little bit more natural. And the hairs do not have to line up exactly, because they are hair, right? They're not perfect unless you have shaped your eyebrows and done your eyebrows really nicely. There, so that would be our eyebrow. There we go. All right, now we're ready to shade. When we shade, I am going to erase any of these unnecessary lines that maybe we don't need. So all of these lines here, this eye line that goes through the middle, you don't, when I look at you or when you look at me, there is no line going through the middle of our eye. So I'm going to erase all these unnecessary lines we don't want. All right, and you can still see them a little bit, and that's okay, not a big deal. All right, so let's start shading. So the first easiest way to shade is your pupil, right? Because it's just going to be black. So I'm just going around making the outside line a little bit thicker so that when I come to color it in, I stay inside my line. That's my trick that I use to stay inside the lines. And our pupil is black, right? So we can come in and make it super, super black. I'm going around my highlight, remember that I put in here, and it's highlights should be really organic. shaped. They're not perfect. They're not perfect circles or rectangles or whatever. Okay, so there is my pupil. Pretty easy. All right, when we go to our tear duct, sorry, I just saw some white spots and it bothered me. Sometimes I get to be a little bit too much of a perfectionist when it comes to this. So when we get to our tear duct, it is darker. It's not as dark as our pupil, but it is dark because it's red. So if you were to turn red, black, and white, it's going to be one of your like medium grays or dark medium gray. So I always like to make it a little bit darker on the inside corner here because your eyelid's covering it. So wherever your eyelid is covering it is going to be a little bit darker. So a little bit darker there. And then we're going to keep that medium, but it's going to get a little bit lighter as it comes out because that shadow isn't necessarily there anymore. Like that. So it is a little bit darker on this side and then blends out. How do you blend out? Pressure of your pencil. So when I'm doing the darker area, I'm adding a little bit more pressure, and then when I want it lighter, I let off of that pressure and it gets it really light. The key to doing this is making sure, and I'm going to do it down here, that you don't have like a line like this. Here, I'll do it thicker, and then a line like this. So you can see in the middle here that there is a separating line. You don't want that. When you do it, you want it to go from dark and then let up, and have it be a nice, smooth transition. Okay, so we don't want those lines. We want a nice, smooth transition. The next part I like to do is the shadow that's under the eyelid. So I come here, and just like we did this here, I'm gonna sort of bring this, make this line a little bit thicker here and a little bit darker. Doesn't have to be black, but it should be a little bit darker and a little bit thicker because your eyelid is naturally creating a shadow onto your eye. And I know that looks weird, just bear with me, okay? The next thing we're gonna do is our iris. We'll get to the white parts in a second here, but I wanna do our iris first. Your iris, no matter what shade you have for your eyes, it's always darker. There's a ring that's outside, it's always darker, and then it gets lighter, and sometimes it gets a little bit a different color that's around the pupil. So what I like to do is come in here and make the outside edge a little bit darker here. Again, this will help keeping our next step, our next shading in side of our iris here. Plus, that's the way you look, so it works out really nicely. All right, so just like that. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna add sort of like bicycle spokes around the eyes coming from the pupil out. It just works out and makes it look more 3D if you come from the pupil out. When we do this though, let's say this is my eye, my iris, and my pupil here. I don't want this. All right, we don't want bicycle spokes like that. We want them to be nice and close, and I'll show you here, but this is a sad face. We don't want that. So from here, and you'll see me turn the paper a lot with this because it's just easier to keep your stroke the same. You're gonna come from the middle, and you want sort of a sharpened pencil. So if you look and you have a flat spot on your pencil, do use that like pointy side. You may have to go sharpen it real quick too. So you're gonna come here and see how these are close together and coming from my pupil on out. Depending on the color of your iris will make your strokes either darker or lighter. It just really depends. So I'm sort of going for medium tone right now. I'm gonna go around my highlights here. So I wanna keep those not filled in. I will tell you, if you're having a hard time with this, it might be if you have a big eye like what I have, the scale might be a little too big to start off with. And if you're struggling with that, that's okay. It just might take you a little bit to get this right. All right, so now we've got that, and that's not done yet. There might be some spots, like I'm looking here and there's some spots that need to be filled in. Go back and fill those in so it doesn't look like this down here. So there might be some areas that need to be a little bit more defined. Go back and fill those in a little bit here. All right, the next thing I like to do is I like to come around again, but I don't go all the way out. I come like sort of halfway, sort of not halfway. I vary the length I go from the pupil out, and I make it a little bit darker just for a change in color here. And it just sort of brings out a little bit more of that 3D look to it. Helps it look a little bit more realistic. So some of them I'm going short, some of them I'm going long, just for the varying flecks of colors that we have in our eye. Like your eye, if your eye is green, it's not just solid green, right? There's lots of different greens in there. You might have a little bit of a brown green, a little bit of a blue green, you know, it really just depends. So adding that on there really helps. But then if you look, the outside of your iris isn't white. So what I suggest, especially on this big of a scale, on littler eyes, you may not have to do that because your strokes may fill in the whole area. What you can do here is take your finger and just sort of blend it out a little bit. Taking your strokes and pushing that value out. And I typically do not recommend to do this. Like I am a big don't smudge kind of person. But when you're working with this big of a scale, this is probably the best way to do it. Now, after you do this, you may have to come back in and fix some of these because they got smudged. So I always come back in and sort of fix some of these lines here, going towards the outside a little bit more. This last time I go more towards the edge to get my eye really defined here. Especially around my highlights here, I need to make sure that they are visible. Now I did smudge on top of them. I don't know if you guys saw that, but that's okay because then I can always come back and erase that, especially since my smudge was light. So I can come back in and make these a little bit lighter, especially that guy up there if I needed to. So now I've got my iris done. Now you can see from moving my paper around and having my hand go, my eye, the white of my eye isn't exactly white, and that's okay. Like it's okay to have that because the white of your eye isn't pure white because of the shadows that are on it. So if you've got a couple smudges here, and especially if you've got like your finger, you can come back into your pupil here and make your finger a little bit black like that, and then come to the outside and make it a little bit darker. Come to the inside part, make it a little bit darker because your eye is round. So when it goes back into your head, there is a little bit of shadow on this side. So you can come in and sort of naturally put that shadow there, keep it a little bit lighter around here, and you're good to go. See? So sometimes those smudges really work out in your favor. We're gonna do the eyelid next. So just like we said with the eye, your eye is round, your eyelid is also round. When we shade, we're gonna have it a little bit darker here, and it's gonna get lighter towards the middle of your eye or middle of your eyelid because of how round it is. We're gonna bring the shading from here up underneath our eyebrow as well. And a lot of times it's darker here and gets lighter on this side because of your brow bone. So if you feel right here on yourself, you'll feel that brow bone and it sticks out and it's gonna catch more of the light than any other part is. Now, while I was talking, I noticed this spot here, this smudge spot. I'm gonna erase it. I probably would have gone over it, but I just want a clean slate. Your eyelid is a crease in your eye, right? So again, just like some of these other areas here, we need to come in and make it darker because it is a crease in your eye. It is a dark spot on your eye. Even though it's light, it's gonna be, your eyelid's gonna be lighter here. That crease doesn't get lighter, it just stays dark. And you may have to come back in and darken that. Sometimes I have to, sometimes I don't. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start from this side and go up, and I'll come back from this side and go this way. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to have it be dark here. I know it sounds crazy, and I'm going to bring this shadow out, and it's sort of going to fade out. But if you were doing a nose as well, I'm going to make a flat spot with my pencil. When you have a flat spot with your pencil, it makes it a whole lot easier to shade because your shading's much smoother. So I'm going to bring some of this shading down, and we'll extend it a little bit, but realistically, you would bring it down for your nose. And we're not there yet, so we're not going to do it. But I'm going to bring this shading up here. And it's pretty much the same, but as we start getting towards the top, it's going to get a little bit lighter. The key to this, though, is that your skin, no matter what color you are, is not as white as your eye. So it has to be darker than what your eye was, right? Or the white of your eye, I should say. Sorry, I wasn't specific on that. But I'm looking here and it looks the same. So I'm going to make this a little bit darker here and bring it up and lighten my pressure up as I get here so it gets lighter. So hopefully we can see more of a change going up. And yeah, you can. That's better there. So I'm going to come back on the outside here. Now the outside isn't as dark as this, but we still need to be able to see a change. I'm going to move my paper so that my hand isn't in this awkward position. So again, finding that flat spot with my pencil, getting a little bit dark out here. And then as it gets towards my middle of my eye, it's getting lighter. And there's not going to be as much of a change on this side as there was on this side because there's more shadow in here where your eye socket is and where your nose is. So there's always going to be a little bit more shadow on that side. And you are going to blend this out. And this generally will get pretty light and go to your natural skin tone that is on the outside there. I'm gonna come in and sort of just fade this crease just a tad. So it's not just a line, like I'm just blending it out, which means that I'm going dark and then getting light super quick with the pressure on my pencil. And it just sort of helps make it look a little bit more realistic. I'm gonna copy this same shading up on the top here, just not as dark. So it is gonna, this dark shading here is gonna come up a little bit. It's getting a little messy on the outside, and that's okay. So it's gonna come up here. It's gonna get a little bit lighter towards the eyebrow. But again, our skin tone is not as white as the paper, no matter how light-skinned you may think you are. I'll get it a little bit lighter towards my eyebrow hair here, going into my eyebrow hair, and that's okay because then it will help blend it out. Come back in and make this a little bit darker here. So really what I'm doing right now is really putting down my skin tone color. And this can be done pretty quickly. You really want to make sure you don't see like lines though. You want it to be a flat spot so it really blends nicely. I have to keep moving my paper in weird ways because of these lines on the table. It makes a line on my page then. So this blends out and gets to be the even color with that. I am going to make it a tad bit darker over here and have it blend up just to make it look like it's that round feeling, right? Now it looks like my eyebrow's sort of blending in a little bit, so I can come in if I need to and make it a little bit darker. Now, a lot of us, our eyebrows are darker. Some of us, we have really, really light eyebrows, so this will be a little bit more difficult for you to make that stand out, but you can make it work. So now we've got that. I want to work with the bottom lid a little bit, and then we'll do eyelashes, which I know you probably are all like, where are the eyelashes? And so When we do our bottom lid, it's not like a line like this. It's sort of, you can see it and you can't see it, right? It's sort of difficult. So what I like to do is I like to take this shading. I'm gonna make this a little bit darker so we can see the difference between my tear duct and my shading. I like to take my shading and I like to bring it down under the eye. Again, it's always gonna be darker coming from the nose area. Get another flat spot. I moved my pencil in my hand, so I have to make another flat spot, which is okay if you have to stop and do that a couple times because it'll make things a lot smoother if you do. And we're working on a really large scale, so it does make a difference. So I'm gonna take this darker area here. Sorry, I get distracted, like I said before, and I have to come in and fix things sometimes. So I'm gonna bring this dark area here, and I'm gonna bring it down. And it is gonna be dark for a little bit, and it's okay. It's not gonna look like you've got a black eye, but it's just gonna look, once you would have a nose, it really gets it to look really nicely. So I'm bringing this dark shadow under here just a little bit. So it's going all the way under here, almost to my line that I drew, but not exactly. And this is gonna fade out really quickly, because again, I'm gonna move my pencil again, see? I don't want it to look like I've got a black eye. Now, some of you may say, oh, I've got bags under my eyes, and that may be true. We're not gonna focus on that right now because that would be all the way down here. So we're just gonna focus on this area for right now. And we're bringing our bottom lid all the way up here. We're gonna fade this. Okay, so again, just laying a layer of skin tone down. We are not as white as the paper, so we need a little bit of some shading here going on. So we're just laying that down. All right, and that creates an illusion. If you need to, you can come back in and sort of make the top line of that tear duct a little bit darker, especially by your iris here, because we need that separation here. And again, I like to sort of smudge right there to give it a little bit more of a realistic look, like that. So it's gonna give the bottom eyelid look there. All right, eyelashes. I typically tell people not to do eyelashes on the bottom lid. It gets to look spidery and weird. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add eyelashes to the top lid. You have to remember that you are not a movie star, so our eyelashes should not go above our eyelid very much. Like a lot of people will make their eyelashes go all the way up to the eyebrow. And that's if you are like Kim Kardashian and have those fake eyelashes on. The other thing is eyelashes aren't perfect. They crisscross and they go all these different ways. When we start on the outside here, we're gonna start outside here, and I'm gonna make like a sort of a loop like that on the edge, where it meets our eyelid. So I'm gonna loop, and I'm crisscrossing a little bit, making some long, some short. They do go a little bit into the white of your eye, and sometimes I have to come in and redo that because I forget. So because they curl, and there are some areas where the eyelashes aren't as thick, it's just how it is. And if you don't believe me, you can go look in the mirror. So I'm going, crisscrossing them a little bit, bringing them up. It's really, really helpful to use a really sharp pencil. As I get towards the top of the lid here, I'm not making them curve as much on the top, just because our perspective, that's not what we see. They're going more straight up. And so they aren't curving as much. And then as we start going towards the outside of the eyelid, and I have to change my paper to get just a better angle for me. As we start going towards the outside, it does sort of come back down, right, and have that little curve towards our tear duct. And you may not be able to see your eyelashes really well because of our shading towards our tear duct, and that's okay, as long as you can see a little bit of it. And that, my friends, is how you would shade your eye. I would be very careful, and you can experiment with it by adding the lower lashes on. I think sometimes it can look not so good. If you were doing a really big close-up of an eyelid like we are doing now, you would add some on, but you have to be very careful with that because you don't want it to look unnatural and like you've got these really giant like fake eyelashes on the bottom as well. And they are curling up just like on our top eyelashes. They are curling up on our bottom eyelid a little bit there. And as they get towards the middle, they don't curl as much, just like on the top, they sort of come straight down. And then they start to curl outwards, like this a little bit. All right, and there you go. That, my friends, is how you would shade an eye. If you have any questions, let me know, but this is pretty much it.